By a strange coincidence, I happen to be sitting here in a kind of a biased role because after almost 20 years in academia, I returned to my management roots, because before I became an academic, I was editorial director of two biggest Slovenian publishing houses for 15 years. And now, actually, I got this job of being curator of the Slovenian Guest of Honor program in Frankfurt. To be again honest, basically because after a lot of political fighting and scandals and so on, nobody wanted to take the job. And as a person who spent many years in Frankfurt, I felt somehow obliged to do this. And on the other hand, I saw this as a great opportunity, which basically happens once in a lifetime. And very symbolically, this year's Frankfurt will be my Frankfurt number 33. And 33 is a nice number to do some cuts in life. But when I started to work on this last summer, I wanted to have some, let's say, managerial answers to what I'm doing. So my first question is, why doing this? And when I checked the previous guests of honor, of course, one very simple answer is because countries who go there want to sell more books. They want to sell more rights for the books which are coming from their culture. And in a country which is actually such a small country as Slovenia, Slovenia is half of the size of Slovenia. So when Ture and Helge are doing one presentation together, I do one presentation only by one person because they're half smaller country. And when Slovenia applied for the being guest of honor in Frankfurt, there were only two publishing houses who were experienced in selling rights. Selling rights business is a very interesting subfield of publishing where you have to have a lot of specialist skills, and besides you need to have a huge network of people who are involved in rights business. So developing this kind of networks is a kind of precondition of being successful in rights business, and doing this kind of program as guest of honor is a very good opportunity for some publishers to develop this. And of course, increasing number of translations is important issue. There is one thing which needs to be stressed is that there is not necessary correlation between higher turnover and right sales and increased numbers of translations, because some translations really don't generate any income whatsoever, and some translations are published by publishing houses which really have no impact on some markets. I will come back to this issue a little bit later. And then another goal is to make authors visible abroad. This is somehow connected to what Jakob was presenting earlier, because part of his work on impact of Slovenian authors is also partially connected to my interest of curating guest of honor, because I want to see how visible Slovenian authors are in Germany and in other markets. How big is their presence in media, and also how big is their presence in libraries and of course in bookshops, predominantly online bookshops. So this is a very nice indicator. And of course, this was very nicely shown in the previous presentation, promoting the culture of guest of honor country as such. How does this program work? I mean, when Slovenia signed a contract with Frankfurt to be guest of honor about 4 years ago, with this contract comes a kind of a manual how to do it. And a significant part of this how to do it knowledge is that what really matters is to organize a kind of networkings among the publishers from guest of honor country and among the publishers from Germany and other foreign countries. So Slovenian Book Agency, which is in charge of this project, introduced quite a significant number of grants for foreign publishers to visit Slovenia. And what is even more important is to organize also grants for translators, because translators from the guest country to other languages are actually a kind of literary scouts for foreign publishers, and higher number of grants in translation somehow grants that not only that publishers will be interested to publish books from guest of honor country, but also that translators will be motivated financially to do this, because they need to be paid properly to do these translations. Hopefully I will do this kind of presentation next year when I will try to evaluate what we did. But as an anecdote, I can tell that one of the biggest, and this shows that we are successful to an extent. Our biggest problem now is that we don't have enough translators from Slovenian to German language. We have only 3 or 4, which are really good. These are quite rare people. They either come from Austria, where there is a Slovenian minority and these people are bilingual, or they come from mixed Slovenian-German families. So these are the people who are actually raised in 2 languages, and they are equally at home in German and in Slovenian language, which is really a very important thing for a good translator. And our problem now, for example, is that a few books are standing in the pipeline because there is no decent translator to do them. So we will have less titles published in Germany than we would be hoping. And another important thing is, of course, to connect with the audience from the guest country. So that's why all guests of honor organizes visits of publishers, book bloggers, which are actually as important as some journalists, and of course also booksellers. Talking to booksellers is extremely important, because booksellers are those who make these books visible. And what guests of honor countries usually do is that they organize meetings with booksellers. In previous times, long time ago, before COVID, most of these events were taking place live in different regions of Germany, but now they are taking place mostly via Zoom, what is very likely not that efficient as live meetings. But this is really a kind of a precondition of a success to engage with all this public. And what most of the guest of honor countries do in Frankfurt is that they hire German PR agencies who do this, and again there are, I would say, 3 or 4 agencies who are really skilled in this and who could be of enormous help. It costs money, but doing this without them, I think it's even much more costly. And then another big important question for those who do this program is actually who is the target audience. Is it German media and book readers? And again, I would say that in German, the typical answer to this question would be Jein. Yes or no. Why yes or no? Because, of course, German media and book readers, they're interested in Slovenian books and so on and so forth, but half time Frankfurt Book Fair is closed for them. So in the first 2 days of the Frankfurt Book Fair, there is some German media, of course, but there is no book audience. So when guests of other countries doing a program, they have to keep this in mind and structure the program accordingly. Then another important question, of course, is target group are acquisitioning editors of a variety of publishing houses and rights persons in international publishing. And again, the way, it's quite a complex issue how to interact with them, because all these people were contacted before, in previous 5 years, because they published the books. But there is still an interest to attract this kind of people to the pavilion of guest of honor, and we will very likely perform a similar trip which Norway tried in 2019. We will have a set of professional events which might be interested for rights persons and for acquisitioning editors, in which we will also discuss some of these topics which were mentioned at this conference. For example, one of my pet subjects is which is actually a kind of elephant in the room or dinosaur in the room in many continental European book markets, namely the size of English book markets. That's something what is very interesting, and we'll try to do a few panels with this, involving people from Libri, from Ingram, and so on, to discuss these issues. We also plan to pay a lot of attention to smaller book markets. This is this nice stretch between Baltics and Mediterranean Sea, between West and East Europe, which is predominantly made of small book markets, which have their peculiarities. And these book markets are almost never discussed at the professional panels in Frankfurt Book Fairs as organized there. So we, for example, want to do a special emphasis on this. And the goal is to, by these events, to attract people to the pavilion of the guest of honor country, which is actually empty in the first 2 days. I checked in Spain, and on Wednesday and Thursday the pavilion was more or less empty because professionals were in the meeting and there was nothing interesting going on in the pavilion. So this is of course a big issue. And then of course domestic audience. The problem which I think many guest of honor countries have is that they have to focus on German market and on the international market, but at the same time they have to explain everything what they do to domestic audience, which doesn't understand usually the logic of big markets. So it's a lot of media involvement required in this, and it's quite, I would say this, I use politically incorrect language. It's a bit pain in the ass to handle all these questions. And if you look, I mean, my impression when we analyzed 5 guests of honors before we started preparing quite quickly before we started preparing our program, I will show some results later. This is a good thing of being a university teacher because you can do a lot of research with the students. And of course, this different guests of honors with different approaches. Some were totally internationally oriented and they didn't give a damn about their domestic audiences. Some were very cautious about dealing with their domestic audiences. For example, Spain has in its pavilion a special broadcasting unit for Spanish radio, which broadcasts many events. What was quite easy to do because they were in Spanish. And we, of course, don't dare to do events in the middle of the Frankfurt and Slovenian language. So this is one of the indicators. Another very funny indicator is that what we find out that some guests of honor prefer to use German moderators for events, like journalists, publishers, and so on. Some avoid this. And of course, another interesting thing is the number of professional events. For example, we will do this, and Norway did this because that book which Helge and Tore like to speak about book policies was actually prepared for the Norwegian Guest of Honor program in Frankfurt in order to engage with professional publics. Now, a few data. I apologize because I didn't have time to translate it from Slovenian, but it's graphs, so they show everything. So this is the number of events per country. Finland, Georgia, you know what Georgia is? Okay, Georgia, not Georgia, USA, but Georgia, Europe, Norway, Canada, and Spain. And the green column is number of events at the time of the book fair. In the book fair, the violet one is number of events in the Frankfurt city, because there is about 30 venues where different book events can take place in Frankfurt, and the green one is the accumulate number of events, and the blue one is the number of events at the book fair. And you can see the big losers here are Canada, obviously because of COVID. They had to postpone once, and then when the book fair took place, it was half empty. In 2021, there were some jokes that we could have football tournament in some of the halls because they were completely empty. So Spain was the first guest of honor which was basically back to normal, and you can see actually that unfortunately, Finland is 2014 because we wanted to look at one guest of honor which was quite far away from now because of various reasons, which I will explain later. But it shows quite nicely, this graph, that actually the number of events went up. So guest of honor countries want to produce more events than it was normal, let's say, 10 years ago. And of course, Slovenia will follow this policy. This is the number of voters per country. It's again quite logical. Bigger the country, smaller the number of voters. Again, Canada, that's COVID. And actually, I would say, of course, it doesn't call it bigger the country number, the bigger the number of voters, because what we calculated, what somehow is that if you come with more than 100 voters, then there is a problem where to put them. Because there is not enough events for that many voters. So I would say that 150 voters is a kind of a top number of voters which can be taken to Frankfurt, because more voters would mean that there would be too many events, or there would be a collusion with the first or second Newton law that two bodies cannot be on one place at the same time, and so on. So it doesn't work in that way. Then we look also at the gender ratio, and it's very interesting that there was actually a shift. I would say that Canada was the first guest of honor with higher number of female voters than male voters, and then followed by Spain, and of course followed by Slovenia also. I can say that because we are that far into preparing our program. And you can see that Finland and, let's say, Norway, they had quite a nice balance between the two genders, but Georgia as a kind of a little bit, there is nobody from Georgia, old-fashioned East European country, it had more male than female authors. But this shift, I think, is here to stay. What we will see with all other guests of honors would be either a kind of a gender balance or a little bit higher number of female authors than male authors, because writing is becoming quite a female profession. And my funny experience was, when we did all the events, my feeling was, Jesus, what about gender balance? I was not thinking about it, but when we counted the genders, we saw that we are perfectly balanced, with a little bit higher authors, number of female authors. It just happened just like that. So it was, and I was very, very pleased with this, because it was one problem less. There will be, of course, no Afro-Slovenian authors, because there is no Afro-Slovenian authors. We will be predominantly white people coming, but we will pick up all kinds of minorities between authors, and that's what Spain did, and that's what, for example, Austria did at the Leipzig book fair. So everybody who is connected to the Slovenian culture, and this means either writing in Slovenian language, regardless the continent where he or she lives, or living in Slovenia but writing, for example, in English. All these kind of authors were considered as a Slovenian authors, and as far as I could find out, both Spain and Canada had the same ecumenic approach. So this is a kind of a new approach, which is quite different of the one, I would say, 90s or early 2000s. Then this is an important, interesting data. The average age of authors, it looks old. I mean, not for me, because I'm an old white man, but for somebody younger, this structure might look old. But I'd say that this is quite normal, because if you have in mind that if you want to be part of the Frankfurt Book Fair, you need to have a few books translated. And if you want to have a few books translated, you first have to make a name in your own country. And this cannot happen just overnight. So I would say that most of internationally successful authors are around 30 years old. There are some exceptions. Of course, in Slovenia we have one great author which we share actually with Austria, Anna Marwan, who won the biggest Austrian literary prize, Ingeborg Bachmann, and she writes half a Slovenian, half in German. She's Slovenian, married to Vienna, and she's 30 years old. She actually went to kindergarten with my daughter. But this is an exception, you know. This such a young authors in Frankfurt, delegations of authors are an exception. So I would say that age varies between 40, 50, and 60. Usually the oldest author is around. Actually, Canada has a record with the oldest author because the lady was 97 years old when she went to Frankfurt. I forgot the name. We had a plan to bring one author who was last year 909 years old, but unfortunately he decided to die before traveling to Frankfurt. So our oldest author will be 82 years old. No, my hope, no, I will not go into details. So this is the average age by authors by country. And then the interesting thing is what happens to the translations. It was quite complicated to pick up this data, but so we use just Finland, Georgia, and Norway. Why? Because they have the statistics on their websites. And it very nicely shows that this is the year when the country was guest of honor, and you can see here the impact on the number of translations. So the bloody thing works. It makes sense with the guest of honor because the number of translation goes down, goes up, and it goes down afterwards. If you don't do the job properly, or it might be also other reasons. Perhaps your authors don't write good books. I mean, this is something what you cannot have an impact on. So Norway went quite down, but you know, Finland did it well because they maintained this stability, and also Georgia stabilized at a certain number of translations. Then we looked at the German market, and on the German market, the impact of guest of honor is even bigger. It jumps in the year of guest of honor and a few years before, and then it goes down or it stabilizes. So I think these data are quite a proof that the thing works. And then we checked the Slovenian market, and we saw that this guest of honor program has influence even into such a bizarre and small markets as the Slovenian book market is. For example, there is a big jump in Georgian translations. There are almost none translations from Georgian in the Slovenian market, but guest of honor created quite a few. And of course, the impact on Norway was a little bit smaller, because you know UNESCO is everywhere, and some other Norwegian authors, and the same goes with Finland. And then the final question: how to measure the success of being guest of honor? I would say that first thing is. And that's something that is quite nicely seen from the Finnish data. They actually came in 10 years. They make their turnover from right sales bigger, and they are now stable on around 4 million euros turnover with right sales, what is quite nice. So this increased turnover in right sales should be one of the most important indicators of the success of guest of honor country, because it also shows with what kind of publishers the the guest of honor country authors are being published. And here, you know, this is something what I also learned this year. Avoid the Austrians, actually, because they have just 1% market share in German market. So they really don't have any market reach there. There are 2 or 3 publishing houses, Austrian publishing houses, if somebody is interested, I can share the contacts, who do a good and decent work in German book market. But most of the Austrian publishers are just not there. So publishing a book in German with an Austrian book market, with an Austrian publishers, means avoiding actually the real German market. I have just 2 more lines and then I'm done. And then, of course, another good thing is indicator is stability in number of translations. This is very important because if the number of translations goes down, then nothing has been achieved. And this is again somehow connected with the state policies in supporting the export of the books. And most crucially, reliable stats on number of translations, because there are a few guest of honor countries who really blow it in a way that they decided that they are not playing this game anymore, and there is no stats whatsoever what is happening with their translations. So this means that their book agencies, their ministries of culture really don't care about the number of translations. So this is the indicator of the lowest kind, but my guess is with these 4 indicators it could be quite nicely measured whether the guest of honor program was successful or not.
Thank you very much. Now we have 10 minutes to discuss. Questions, please. Please go ahead.